Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Holder, I kind of understanding this issue some, but it's a great tragedy this agent was killed, and it'll be a year next week, as I understand it. And it was a fast and furious weapon that he was killed by, as I understand it. Is there any great difficulty in Mexico for folks who are part of these drug cartels, or folks to get guns? Are guns rather plentiful in Mexico in general?
I think we can safely say that they are available, and the part of the problem with their ready availability is the fact that so many guns flow from the United States to Mexico. As I've said, over the last 5 years, at least 64,000 weapons traced to the United States that were found in Mexico, and those are only the ones that were traced. There are undoubtedly additional guns in Mexico that have not been traced back to the United States.
So while it's a supposition, I would presume that if Fast and Furious didn't occur, that the individuals that committed this this violent act, and it resulted in the death of the agent, they would have probably had weapons anyway.
We can never. You can never suppose. I mean, it's never. But for is always hard to determine. But I don't think that's an illogical conclusion that the people who were involved in that senseless, tragic, awful murder probably could have had access to other weapons.
I kind of remember the president of Mexico saying something about most of the guns that come there come from the United States. And I think he also said something about most of the market he has for marijuana comes from the United States, too. So we supply him with guns and a market. We could certainly dry the market up, but that's the job of the Judiciary Committee, I realize. What are we doing to try to stop guns from going into Mexico? Are there efforts at the border to stop guns from traveling from this country there?
Well, we have moved people to the border. We work with our partners. The Justice Department works with our partners at DHS to try to come up with ways in which we inspect cars that are going from the United States to Mexico. We have teams of agents that work together to try to determine ways in which we can stop the flow of guns. We use a variety of intelligence methods that I can't really get into to try to determine if cars are trying to bring into Mexico huge stashes of guns. But we also need to use things on this side of the border, and that's one of the reasons why that long gun rule, I think, is so important. If we see substantial numbers of these long guns being purchased, it gives the ATF real-time leads that they can follow to see if, in fact, these are legitimate purchases or they are purchases by people intending to have those guns shipped to Mexico.
Coming home, which is where I think the real issues are, not to say that they're not important about the border and all, but in our cities we've got a lot of youth violence and gangs, and I want to commend you for having a national forum on youth violence prevention, and included Memphis in the forum. Can you give the committee some information about what you've done to help inner cities fight youth violence and gang activities?
Well, one of the things I want to say is that the 5 police chiefs behind me from Charlotte, Detroit, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Boston have all embraced, and we've learned from them, the way in which we deal with this issue of youth violence. That it is not simply a question of doing what is traditional law enforcement, that we have to come up with ways in which we deal with the underlying problems that involve our young people in these antisocial behaviors. Congressman Scott has been, I think, very forward-leaning in this regard with legislation that he has proposed and that we support. We've tried to deal with these underlying causes, and it's been particularly useful to have our partners in law enforcement identify with and be participants in these preventive activities, in addition to all the great things that they do on the enforcement side. And the thing that you've talked about, what we're doing in Memphis, is an example of the kinds of things that we are trying to do in the Obama administration.
I would like to, Mr. Chairman, to comment that the gentleman from Philadelphia, I believe the chief, I recognized you, and I kept thinking, where do I know you from? Where I knew you from was when you testified before this committee on the bill to allow folks who had gun permits to travel from state to state based on federal edict rather than state cooperative agreements. And at the time, I was a sponsor of the bill that ended up passing, but because of your testimony and law enforcement's objections, as well as my belief in states' rights, I changed my position, came off as a sponsor, and voted against the bill. Your testimony was effective, and it's nice to see you again, and I thank you for that. I'd yield back the remainder of my time to the chairman.
Thank you.